weeks of Conservatives demanding the government develop a strategy for rapid COVID-19 testing, some tests finally arrived yesterday. The problem is 100,000 tests is more of a sample than a supply. They will be used up in 3 days, Mr. Speaker. Other countries have had access to millions of rapid tests for months. Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister let the Health Committee find out why Canada is at the back of the line when it comes to rapid tests?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Canada is not at the back of the line, and let me refresh the memories of the members opposite on the 5 rapid tests that we have already authorized. The B-Kit virus finder from HIRIS, the BD Veritor system from Becton Dixon and Company, the Abbott ID Now, the Abbott PanBio, the Expert Express from Cepheid. More tests are being looked at by our regulators every single day, and they are arriving in Canada every day, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, Canada's Global Public Health Intelligence Network was a global leader in pandemic warning before this government turned it off last year. Even after that decision, multiple departments of the government were warning them that they had to take COVID more seriously. But the government got it wrong on human-to-human transmission. They got it wrong on the border. They got it wrong on masks. Mr. Speaker, why is the Prime Minister denying Canadians the opportunity to learn the lessons from the first wave so that we can be better prepared to protect Canadians?
Full Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let me again remind the members opposite of the prompt action our government took as this novel coronavirus hit the world. On January 2nd, PHAC spoke directly with all provincial health authorities. On January 14th, PHAC convened a meeting of all provincial health authorities. On January 27th, we had increased screening at major airports. On January 27th, we also convened the Incident Response Group. On January 28th, we convened the Special Advisory Committee of Chief Public Health Officers across the country, and I can and will go on.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the trouble is, 2 months after those dates, the health minister of the country was still saying there was nothing to worry about, Mr. Speaker. Countless contracts for PPE and other supplies have been held behind national security designations. After the Frank Baylis affair, we can all understand why. But the motion before the House to allow the Health Committee to look at the process will make sure Canadian healthcare workers get the best equipment and that taxpayers get value for money. Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister let the Health Committee do what it's supposed to do and make sure that we put the health of Canadians ahead of contracts for Liberal MPs?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take this opportunity to address very directly the insinuation at the heart of that question. The suggestion that our government, in those dark days in the spring, when we came together as a country to fight this novel global pandemic, was focused on anything other than protecting the health and safety of Canadians, working closely with the provinces, territories, and municipalities is simply untrue, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I'm inclined to believe the Deputy Prime Minister, but when they continually cover up, when they prorogue Parliament, when her colleague Mr. Morneau resigns, when they delay committees, when they threaten elections, pardon me, Mr. Speaker, if I don't believe her sincerity. Canadians want answers. Will the Deputy Prime Minister put the health of Canadians first and vote with us for a Health Committee study on COVID-19?
Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let me clear up a couple of things. The first is I always put the health and safety of Canadians first. And let me say something else. I really believe that every single member of this House does the same thing. I know that we disagree on a number of policy issues, But I really believe we are all here to serve Canadians. We understand this is a moment of national crisis, and I really hope we can continue to put the national interest first, as we did when we voted unanimously for the EI-CRB changes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, a lot of cover-up from this government. Journalists are asking the Liberal government questions on the Frank Baylis ventilator contract. No answers. Now journalists want Mr. Baylis to explain himself, but Mr. Baylis is refusing to take calls and not responding to his door. Are the Liberals ashamed of supporting millionaire friends during a pandemic? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I want to give a very exact answer with regard to Mr. Baylis. There is no contract between PSPC and Baylis Medical. Following the recommendation of an expert advisory panel, representatives of PHAC gave a contract. There is no link between public procurement and Baylis. The Honourable Member for Beloeil-Chambly. Thank you. The French community and the Americans is often subject to hate speech, but it doesn't seem like much compared to what the visible minorities sometimes have to bear on a daily basis. It's time for solidarity and to commit to a better society. It starts with the recognition, science, and the critical analysis, but the use of a word that history has conferred a humiliating, racist, or degrading meaning is doing so in a university setting where analysis is important to be prohibited. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government is unequivocal. Anti-Black racism is unacceptable. We cannot remain silent when there is injustice. We must come together and listen to the experiences lived by our fellow Canadians and take action. The Honourable Member for Avignon-La Métis-Matane-Matapédia. Mr. Speaker, the university is a place of higher learning, a place privileged for debate and analysis. What is the significance of a word? What does it mean to those hearing it? What weight does it have today and historically? If there is anywhere that such discussions need to happen, it's in the universities with the freedom needed to share that knowledge. Academic freedom means first asking difficult questions with specific care to individual sensitivities without censure. Will the Prime Minister defend academic freedom at the University of Ottawa or not? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, obviously, our government, and I think every member of this House, will defend academic freedom. I am here with many professors. I respect universities a great deal and academics. It is a difficult thing. We must be aware of the reality, and that is what we are doing. There is systemic racism in our country, and we must take action to this. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There is no drinking water in the Neskantaga First Nation. The Neskantaga Nation has not had access to drinking water for 25 years. Imagine not having access to drinking water for that period of time. 25 years, no water to wash your hands, no water to take a bath in. This situation is terrible. The Prime Minister promised drinking water, but he broke his promise. When will Neskantaga First Nation have access to drinking water? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. For our government, the issue of First Nations and drinking water around the country is a priority. We have worked on this, and we have made a lot of progress, but I agree. with the MP that we still have much work to be done. We will do it together with the First Nations leaders around the country.
South.
Mr. Speaker, what's happening right now in the First Nation of Neskantaga is an example, a representation of the abject failure of this government and of previous Conservative governments to address a basic question of access to drinking water. The people of this community are being evacuated. Seniors are being evacuated. Chief Munoz describes the situation like this. He says, "Why is this not a public health emergency? Are we not important? Are we not human? When will the community get access to clean drinking water?"
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member opposite for that very important question. And I really believe that we as Canadians understand that it is a national outrage that there are drinking water advisories still for Indigenous communities in our country. This problem was not created in a day, and it's not going to be resolved in a day. But what I will say is this: our government has worked hard and has had some success. It's not enough, and I am very happy to recommit today to the effort to ensure all communities in Canada have water fit to drink.
Honourable Député.
Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the government prevented Parliament from doing its job. We wanted to create a special committee on allegations of Liberal corruption. Instead, they said, no, we have to deal with the pandemic. Okay. Ask and ye shall receive. Today we're tabling a motion to unfreeze the Standing Committee on Health, and we're asking the government to produce all important documents related to the pandemic. Now that the government's demands have been met, we want to know if the government will cooperate with us and support our motion. The Honourable Deputy or Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, yesterday this House decided Canadians instead of petty politics, chose Canadians instead of petty politics. I know the Conservatives are quite disappointed we're not going to election today, but we're not. And it's an excellent opportunity for the government and, in fact, all parliamentarians to continue to work for Canadians. You know, Mr. Speaker, the government has an extremely important obligation to Canadians, but the opposition parties do so as well. We are working together. Let's work together for Canadians. The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Mr. Speaker, it is our duty to ensure that taxpayer dollars are being used effectively and distributed effectively. So stories such as the one we heard about with Frank Baylis should not be heard anymore. We need to be more careful. With our motion, we want to end parliamentary filibustering by the Liberals on the Standing Committee on Health. When will the government let us do our jobs and give us the documents? The Honourable Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, in fact, we want to work with the opposition parties and with each of the opposition parties. That is our goal and has been since the beginning, and we managed to do that a number of times. You can remember all the times that we had unanimous consent or the support of one party or another party in the opposition. That's what's essential for somebody who lost their job, for a mother who is concerned because her kids can't go to school, and for all Canadians. So my hand is held out. It remains held out. Let's work together in the interest of Canadians.
Nose Hill.
Mr. Speaker, I've been really heartened as a parliamentarian to see collaboration with opposition parties on coming up with a very common sense, nonpartisan motion to review the government's response to COVID-19 so we can chart a firm path forward to get people back to work while keeping people safe. Government isn't so willing. Look, we've likely got the support of opposition parties. So in the spirit of collaboration, I'm asking the health minister, because she said that a 15-day timeline was not reasonable to produce documents in a scrum earlier today. What is a reasonable timeline?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
The Honourable Member for her question, and certainly that's something that I've communicated with the House Leader that should be negotiated. Look, the government is willing to work with the opposition to come up with a timeline that is reasonable, that will get to the goal of understanding what we need to do going forward. Mr. Speaker, I think the member opposite is right, that when we work together, Canadians appreciate it and our response is stronger.
Honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Here's the problem, Mr. Speaker. The minister has had 2 weeks to answer this question because this motion was presented to the Health Committee nearly 2 weeks ago. So the fact that she can't walk into her staff's office and go, hey, what's a reasonable timeline over a 2-week period really belies this government's overall response to COVID and her approach to her staff, which has been slow, incompetent, and costly to Canadian lives. So I'm going to ask her one more time. She's had 4 hours since I asked her this morning, 2 weeks since it was originally moved. What is a reasonable timeline for the production of these documents?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I mean, first I have to take umbrage with defining our civil servants, our staff members who have been working day and night around the clock as slow and incompetent. Mr. Speaker, I think we all can rise above that kind of language and appreciate just how hard everyone in government, in opposition, are working to make sure that Canadians have a response that protects them. But, Mr. Speaker, listen, the member opposite also knows that health committees are independent, and of course that is something that she needs to work through with the Health Committee and their chair.
Honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill.
This is the interesting thing, Mr. Speaker. Today, in an article by Dylan Robertson from the Winnipeg Free Press, we found out that less than half of federal Freedom to Information offices are operating at full capacity, including the Health Ministry. This means that there's people whose actual job it is to produce information for Parliament are sitting at home. I wonder what we could do with them. It's interesting. Maybe they could produce some documents for Parliament. I don't know. What does the minister think?
Great question.
The Honourable Minister.
Again, Mr. Speaker, we hear from the opposition a demeaning of the civil servants who I can attest have been working around the clock to ensure that they have what we need for Canadians as we respond to this pandemic. Mr. Speaker, we have used every available resource to make sure that Health Canada and the Public Health Agency of Canada have what they need so that they can support provinces, territories, indeed Canadians. And Mr. Speaker, we will continue to put the health and safety of Canadians first and foremost in our response.
The Honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Mr. Speaker, it's this incompetence that's costing Canadians their lives. It's these excuses that are keeping businesses shut. It's this just lack of disregard for Canadians' lives, our plan forward, that is keeping women out of the workforce because daycares are closed, because we don't have rapid tests. This has to stop. The motion that we have before Parliament today is nonpartisan. It's getting information that Canadians need so that we can move forward out of this pandemic. What timeline is the minister proposing to produce these documents?
Honourable Minister.
Speaker, I've spoken to hundreds, if not thousands, of Canadians since the pandemic was first announced, and in fact when the COVID-19 has arrived on our shores. And in fact, not once has a Canadian asked me to put more resources into freedom of information officers. In fact, what they've asked me for is to ensure that all the resources of Canada are devoted on one thing, Mr. Speaker, and that's the health, safety, and economic prosperity of our country. And Mr. Speaker, we're going to continue to make sure that Canada has the most robust response possible. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, we know that you Liberals are using COVID to line their pals' pockets. There weren't enough ventilators in the first wave, and the Liberals wanted to make some using Frank Baylis. They know that it wouldn't look good. He was a Liberal MP just last year ago, and they're friends. So they didn't give their friend Frank the money directly. Even they didn't think that would be okay. They gave $237 million to FTI, a shell company created just 7 days earlier. The problem is that FTI does not make ventilators. So, plot twist, they hired their friend Frank as a contractor. Real winners. Are they thinking that it's all a joke? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for the question. Since the beginning of the pandemic, Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada launched a request for proposals from Canadian manufacturers to meet medical needs, urgent medical needs, after A study by an expert panel, the government gave contracts for the national production of ventilators. There is no contract with Baylis Medical. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member for Rivière-du-Nord. Mr. Speaker, that's what they say. The Liberals gave without a request for proposal, thus gives us a reminder of something that happened recently. $237 million to FTI, a company that didn't exist 7 days ago. They said that they needed to have ventilators produced, but FTI doesn't make ventilators. FTI told the Liberals, we know somebody who knows somebody, and the Liberals say, okay, here's your check. Strange coincidence. That someone was a former Liberal MP. Mr. Speaker, if I incorporate and pay $1,000 to do so, can I get $200 million next Thursday? Or does that just work for Liberal friends and Liberal pals? The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I want to reiterate that our government has stepped up to ensure domestic production of ventilators when at the beginning of this pandemic, there was no domestic production of ventilators here in Canada. The president of the Auto Parts Manufacturers Association, in fact, said firms from across this country dropped everything to help save lives by making critical medical goods. Every political stripe, we all did this together, Mr. Speaker. This is important. This is Canada, and this is domestic production. Merci beaucoup.
The honourable member for Rivière-du-Nord. Mr. Speaker, the Liberals knew that it would look bad to give $237 million to Liberal Frank Baylis, so they went through a shell company that transferred the money to him. They also knew it would look bad to give a $900 million program to their friends at We Charity when the organization was in debt up to its neck. But they did the same thing. They signed with We Charity Foundation, a shell company that had no debt because it had no operations. The Liberals are using shell companies to give their friends contracts. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to repeat the question my leader asked. Do they take us for fools? The Honourable Minister.
The Honourable Minister.
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, pas du tout. Ce n'est pas la...
Not at all, Mr. Speaker. This is not the case. No. Our government has committed to the domestic production of personal protective equipment and ventilators, and we will not stop because this is extremely important for Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Kildonan St. Paul.
Mr. Speaker, because this Liberal government is taking so long to provide rapid testing to Canadians, the Manitoba government took the initiative to procure these rapid tests for Manitobans on their own, but this Liberal government blocked them from doing so. They wouldn't allow them. Meanwhile, John Pritchard School and Birds Hill School in my riding in the Winnipeg area have had large COVID-19 outbreaks. Manitobans deserve and need rapid testing now, and we just learned this week that the Liberals have received 100,000 rapid tests. So I want to know how many of these tests are coming to Manitoba and when.
Good question. Minister of Health.
One of the things that has really helped Canada in our response to the pandemic has been the collaboration with provinces and territories and the work together that we've done to prioritize and to distribute, whether it's PPE, tests, and other equipment to Canadians. In fact, through the table of health ministers, we've managed to work out sharing agreements every single time, Mr. Speaker, that work for provinces and territories, that address the needs in their communities, and that ensure that we have the capacity no matter what COVID-19 throws at us.
The honourable member for Kootenay, Columbia.
Mr. Speaker, Air Canada on October 1st purchased 25,000 rapid testing kits approved by Health Canada, so Air Canada could test international travellers, and when negative for COVID, no 14-day quarantine. Canada relies significantly on tourism from outside, from international. Mr. Speaker, can the minister explain why they have not given Air Canada approval for this Health Canada approved rapid testing moving forward with economic recovery safely?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think there's a lot of presumptions in that question that might not be quite accurate. In fact, Air Canada is actually conducting a research study with McMaster University right now on trying to determine when someone could receive a test in order to reduce the 14-day quarantine period. In fact, it's exciting to note that the province of Alberta is working in partnership with the Government of Canada on a very similar research project, Mr. Speaker, just announced today. And these kinds of research projects are going to help us ensure the goal of reducing importations while also looking at ways that we can reduce the quarantine. Mr. Speaker, I will remind Canadians, though, the 14-day quarantine still is applying today.
The honourable member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Mr. Speaker, a local constituent reached out to me about how their families' lives have been on hold due to COVID-19 testing. The dad called the testing center on October 3rd. They went in for testing on October 6th, the first available day. The dad received his test results on October 7th, and the daughters came in on October 12th. This was a 10-day process for this family. The daughter wasn't able to go to school. The dad was not able to work. This is unacceptable. When are regions like the Okanagan Valley and the Lower Mainland going to receive rapid testing?
Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I've been in regular conversations with medical officers of health across the country, including Dr. Henry. I have to congratulate BC. They've had an incredible testing strategy. They have obviously challenges, just like every other province and territory. But, Mr. Speaker, I would encourage the member opposite to get in touch with her MLA and ask about BC's testing strategy and how it's evolving.
Honourable member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Students and graduates in my riding of Edmonton Strathcona are struggling to make their ends meet. Students couldn't get summer jobs because of COVID-19. Recent graduates can't get jobs to kickstart their futures. This Liberal government promised close to $1 billion to help students. Instead, they help their friends at WE. And the students have received none of this money. This government could help students right now with rent, with tuition fees, with groceries. Liberals owe students this money. When will they ensure that the funding goes to students who need it the most?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the member for the question, and I think I should remind all Canadians and all members that it was actually a $9 billion plan that our government put forward for students and youth, and that plan included the Canada Emergency Student Benefit, of which 700,000 students were able to obtain that benefit. Canada Summer Jobs were increased. 84,000 jobs were approved and are still ongoing until February, so I'd encourage students to keep applying. We doubled Canada Student grants for full and part-time students. We instituted a 6-month moratorium for interest as well as payment on Canada student loans. We made investments to ensure that—
Honourable member for Churchill-Kiiwetinoong-Aski.
Mr. Speaker, it's not enough for the Transport Minister to abandon workers, but he also has to gaslight passengers. He tweeted his congratulations to WestJet for issuing refunds to some passengers with cancelled tickets when he literally spent 7 months backing up the airlines. Thousands of passengers have been left waiting. The agency he's responsible for issued a statement on vouchers that rips passengers off directly. Enough with the hypocrisy. Will the government finally take action and step up to defend the rights of all passengers and Canadian consumers?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm certainly aware of the frustration that many consuming passengers have felt, and the action taken by WestJet is a good step in the right direction. I know it's an important issue for Canadians. At the same time, the pandemic has hit hard with the air sector, and that's why we're working on measures to try to ensure that Canadians will be able to continue traveling safely and affordably across this country. And for the information of my colleague, the Canadian Transportation Agency doesn't come under Transport Canada.
Honourable member for Guelph.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've seen employment numbers in my riding rebound to 75% of pre-pandemic numbers. And we've witnessed small businesses changing and innovating their delivery model to continue serving their customers and our community. At the same time, we know more support will be needed in 2021. Could the Minister of Small Business, Export Promotion and International Trade update the House on our government's work to support small business in the coming months as we celebrate Small Business Week?
Minister for Small Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my honourable colleague for that excellent question here during Small Business Week. Small businesses in Guelph and across the country have shown incredible resilience and are working hard in their communities. We're helping thousands of small businesses enhance their digital and e-commerce capabilities. Going digital will enable our small businesses to access the global markets, to export, find new customers, and take advantage of Canada's free trade agreements. We're going to do what is right to keep supporting our small businesses during these very difficult times. We are not left
as they await the Minister of Small Businesses' decision to keep her promise so that they can apply for an emergency business account loan. This government has a terrible record of saying something but taking forever to deliver on it. When will the Liberals make the necessary changes so farmers that use private bank accounts can apply for a CEBA loan? It's been over 6 months, Mr. Speaker.
Minister for Small Business.
I want to thank the honourable member for that question, and those businesses, farming businesses, are absolutely important to the economy of this country. And we are working with the over 200 financial institutions to make this loan available to these businesses as soon as possible, as quickly as possible. And very soon we will announce that process to enable those businesses to get access to this important liquidity support through the small business account so that they can get access to this support. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Caribou Prince George.
Speaker, the rate of suicide across our country is at near epidemic rates. Suicide is now amongst the leading cause of death in Canada. Today, 10 Canadians will end their lives by suicide, and up to another 200 will attempt to do so. The U.S. just taken concrete action to combat suicide by passing the National Suicide Hotline Designation Act. Starting in 2022, a simple, easy to remember number, 988, will be the universal telephone number to reach the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. Will this government commit to doing so?
Well, Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And far too many of us can say that we've been impacted by people who've taken their own lives. I want to tell the member opposite I'm very interested in his idea, and I look forward to talking with him later about what that might look like in Canada. He's absolutely right. We have to do more, Mr. Speaker, not just to prevent suicide, but to support people who are struggling with their mental health no matter where they live in this country.
The honourable member for Pierre.